You're listening to Blackpool Church Podcast. Join us for our Sunday gatherings to make friends, explore faith and encounter God. Visit our website, blackpool.church. This is the Talk Archive.
Sorry to interrupt your conversations. I hope you met someone new. I have this vivid memory of being in year 6, sitting at my table in school, and there are 5 of us around the table. We always sat at the same table, green table, I don't know. And we were doing a quiz, okay? Now, I can't exactly remember what the question was, but it was probably something like, classic old Key Stage 2. What does Mrs. Nerg stand for? Now, I don't know how many of you are thinking, oh, clearly, Tom, we all know what Mrs. Nerg stands for. Just like I was confident with what Mrs. Nerg stands for. And as you know, Mrs. Nerg is the acronym we use to remind you what are the 7 characteristics of living animals or plants or creatures. And so it's M is for movement, and R is for respiration, S is for sensitivity, N is for nutrition, E is for excretion, R is for reproduction. But what's G for? This is what was happening. What is G for? And I couldn't remember what G meant, but I figured it was probably something like germination. I was like, things germinate. I don't know what that means, but it's a sciencey word, right? And so I said germination. Now, I hadn't forced the answers on the team. I had talked the loudest, confidently the loudest. And when someone suggested a different idea, I did back myself. I was like, no, I'm normally right. Just go with what I've said. And so we wrote down what I said. And I made sure we wrote down what I said. Now, it turns out G doesn't mean germination. It means growth. And I was wrong. And the person two round on my table, they said growth, and I said germination louder. And they said, I told you it was growth, Tom. Now, being an 11-year-old boy who was super big-headed and thought I was always right, I just kind of shrugged my shoulders. Told you it was growth, Tom. But I wanted to leave it. But they didn't want to leave it. And so a couple of other people at my table said, are you going to say anything? Are you going to say sorry? And now I'd love to tell you that was when I said, oh, I'm sorry. Absolutely, my mistake. You were right. Well done. Clearly cleverer than me. But that's not what happened. I'm pretty sure, stubborn, big-headed, and extremely unapologetic, I refused to say sorry. And I actually said something like, no, I won't admit I was wrong. Clearly I was wrong. Everyone knew I was wrong. Everyone was looking at me. It was my fault. But no, I won't admit I'm wrong. Now, it's a silly story. And I'm sure we've all been there, and I bet lots of us would like to think we're always right. But as silly as that story is, it makes me slightly uncomfortable to share it with you, because even now a part of me likes to be right. I don't want to look wrong, like an idiot, like a fool. I want you to think I'm right, and I don't like admitting when I'm wrong still. And spoiler for you, as we dig into Judges today, that is the same issue that God's people have. They don't like to admit that they're wrong too. So this morning, I'm going to be continuing our series, Understanding the Old Testament, by looking for Jesus in the book of Judges. And the question that I've got is, what's the problem with humans? Now, just really quickly, when I say judges, don't think of a courtroom or like people wearing long white wigs, because the judges in this book, they're like regional, political, and military leaders. They're more like tribal chieftains. They are people important in the tribes of Israel. They're more like that than they are lawyers. And so let's just look back to what Annie talked about last week. And last week was the book of Joshua. And in that book, we saw the tribes of Israel finally entering the promised land. Joshua called them to be faithful to their covenant with God, to obey the Torah, and to live as a light to the nations around them. It should have been the beginning of a golden era. But when the book of Judges opens, Joshua has just died. And as a reader, we're left wondering, now what? Who's going to lead now? Is this finally the time when Israel live in peace with God? No, unfortunately not. Instead, the book of Judges is basically a story of Israel's complete and total failure. It's basically a big downward spiral in a cycle that just repeats and repeats and repeats, and everything gets worse every time. If you want to follow along, I'll be reading through a little bits of Judges. I'm starting in Judges 2 here, verse 10, and it says this. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. Basically what happens is, as soon as Joshua's generation died, the people seemed to forget all about God. And they turned to worship the false gods of the Canaanites, the people who lived around them. In chapter 1 of Judges, we see that Israel just fails to drive them out. They were asked to push these people out of their land by God so that they could avoid the influence of their moral corruption and the worship of their gods through horrific acts like child sacrifice and rape. God had called Israel to be a holy people. Now, holy literally means set apart, for a different purpose. We're in a different place for a different purpose. But Israel, who were called to be separate and distinct, didn't obey. Instead, they settle among the Canaanites, and they're soon adopting all of their customs. And that is basically the tragic pattern of Judges. Firstly, the people turn away from God and fall into sin. Secondly, they suffer. Third, they cry out for help. And fourth, God in his mercy raises a deliverer, which is a judge, a leader to help them. And then things go well. And so they turn away from God again. And it's just a cycle that keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And basically, things improve for a while at the end of the cycle, but then it begins again. Now, Eloise, my wife, says there's a Taylor Swift song for every situation, for every topic. And I bet you're thinking, there's no way, Tom, there's absolutely no way there is a Taylor Swift song that links to the book of Judges. Not a chance. Challenge accepted. And so, yesterday, on my drive home, I was listening to some Taylor Swift. And I found it, okay? I found it. So, it's from the song Anti-Hero, if you want to check it up later. It's real. And it says this: I should not be left to my own devices. They come with prices and vices. I end up in crisis. And then in the chorus, she says, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. You know? Now, Judges says, it's me, and it's you. It's us. We are the problem. Left to our own devices, left on our own, abandoning God, we end up in crisis every time. So Judges isn't just a historical book. It's a bit like a mirror. It shows us what humanity looks like when we've turned away from God, when we try to rule ourselves without him. It shows us how broken we are, how quickly we forget, and how easily we fall into idolatry. The main point of the book of Judges is that the problem is with humans. We like to think the world is broken because of bad systems or external evil, but Judges shows the spotlight, and it points that spotlight right on us, on our hearts. It shows that the problems aren't just out there in the world. They are there, but they're also in here and in here. Now, one of the central figures in Judges is a man called Gideon. You'll find him in Judges chapter 6 and 7 and 8. And he starts off looking like a seriously promising leader. Basically, God comes to him. They have this bit of conversation. God says, I want you to do this. And he says, I'm not sure if it's you. Can I trust you? And God shows him these signs. And he's like, right, I'm going to do it. And that's when we get to chapter 7. I'm going to read a bit of it. God has called Gideon to lead an army to defeat the Midianites. That's the people who are oppressing them at this time. He is the judge to defeat the Midianites. And so Gideon assembles this great big army of like 32,000 men. Anything is possible. But before they can go to fight, God says to Gideon, you have too many men, Gideon. I can't deliver Midian into your hands, all that their enemies into your hands, because Israel will just say, look, it was us. There was enough of us. We did it. They'll just say it was my own strength that saved me. And so God starts an exercise of trust with Gideon here. And he says, it's not the number of men that you have that will win you the battle. It's whether I go with you. And so you need to get rid of some men. And so God says to Gideon, go to your 32,000 men and say to them, if you're fearful, if you're a bit nervous about going to fight, go home. And so Gideon does that to his 32,000 men. He says, if you're fearful, if you want to go, if you're like, don't really want to fight, you can go home. And 22,000 of them go home. And so immediately he's left with 10,000 men. And he's like, didn't know you're all such wusses, come on. It's just a fight. But it's not going well. And you think, well, God's like taken his army and shrunk it by a third to a third of its original size. Surely that's small enough. But God then says, no, there are still too many men. And so he says, split up the army some more. And this is a weird one. Okay, so bear with me. God says, take the army to like a lake for a drink of water, and then watch how they drink. Okay? Basically, if they get down like on their knees and like put their face in the lake, then send them home, because that's weird, right? Whereas, and this is the other weird bit, if they cup the water and then lap it like that, then they can stay and fight. Okay? Believe it or not, that's what happens. Read it. Judges chapter 7. It's flipping weird. Let's just get over that. Anyway, there's only 300 people that lap the water. And so Gideon is left with 300 men. And he's like, God, we've got a fight to have here. Like, what are you doing? Like, there's no one left now. Everyone, like, drank from the water. They didn't lap it like a cat, honestly. Anyway, it's all a bit weird. There's 300 men left. Now, God then uses Gideon to lead Israel to an incredible, miraculous victory. With these 300 men, they take a pot and they take a torch and they make a lot of noise. They make it look like there's loads of people. And the Midianites flee and they're killed. It's a miracle. Like, God defeats a much larger army because he's God. It looks like a success story, right? And it is in many ways. Gideon trusted, and God won the fight. But Gideon's story then takes a bit of a turn. See, after his victory, the people say to him, we want to make you king, Gideon. And Gideon says, no. I'm super humble. Don't make me a king. But then he says, I wouldn't mind a fancy chair, though. Just one. What's one fancy chair going to do, It's just a big chair. It's not making me a king. He gets a big head, Gideon does. And then he says, what if you all give me a bit of the gold that you got from the armies that we killed, and I'll melt it and I'll make a priestly ephod, like a robe of gold, and then I'll put it in my house in my hometown, and people can go there and worship it. And then it gets worse, because then he says, what shall I name my son? I'll name him Abimelech. Now, Abimelech means son of the king. So he said he wasn't a king, but he did start to act like a king. He likes the thrones and the sons of the kings and the people worshipping at his hometown. It goes very badly for Gideon. Gideon, the judge, the deliverer, becomes a source of idolatry. And it's actually his son Abimelech who slaughters all of his other children. Is a power grab. He says, no, I want to be king. So he kills everyone else. And so at the end of Gideon's life, he leaves behind a legacy of corruption and violence, of idolatry. even the good guys turn away from God. Now, this is one of the key themes of Judges. Even the people God raises up to save Israel are flawed. They may have moments of faith, but they also reveal the brokenness of a human heart. And Judges is filled with deeply flawed leaders. Jephthah, one of the people, sacrifices his own daughter because he thinks God wants that. God doesn't want that. Samson chases after different women and then personal vengeance. Like, even Gideon compromises, building an idol and being filled with pride. We need better leaders than that. Now, just as a little aside, we shouldn't be surprised when we see leaders today fall short, whether it's in politics, church, or public life. So many of our leaders promise change, but end up reflecting that same human weakness. The book of Judges shows us that charisma and competence, even success, aren't enough. Gideon won the battle, but he lost his way. And today, it's still super easy to elevate leaders who perform well, rather than those who walk closely with God. But it matters way more that our leaders are becoming like Jesus than whether they're persuasive or impressive or successful. Now, we've heard stories recently of Christian leaders who get things wrong, who've let people down or even purposefully hurt people. And ultimately, like in Judges, they leave a lot of mess and they hurt a lot of people. And whilst Judges shows us, maybe we shouldn't be surprised. Clearly, we're all flawed. It still doesn't stop it hurting. It still doesn't make it any less upsetting. And so if you're sat there and you've been hurt by bad leadership, particularly bad Christian leadership, then I'm sorry for that. It shouldn't have happened. It's not the way of the world. It's not the way of the gospel, but it is the way of flawed people in a broken world. But the book of Judges also shows us that God sees it. God is constantly getting involved, constantly turning the cycle round again, raising a new judge to lead. He's not happy with it too. And spoiler for the rest of the talk, but God has a plan. And he is the ultimate leader, the ultimate judge. He will never get things wrong. He will never let you down. He will never fail. And so today we need leaders who are like Jesus. We need leaders who are faithful, not flashy. We need leaders who confess their sins rather than cover them up. We need leaders who seek to serve rather than seek to lead. And that starts with us. Whether you're leading in a church, a home, a school, a workplace, with your friends, the call is to follow Jesus closely, not just perform publicly. And so let's not be surprised when human leaders let us down. Let's be saddened. Absolutely. And let's look for and become leaders who follow Jesus, who walk humbly and depend on his grace. So the book of Judges doesn't just show us why people turn away from God. It shows us why they turn away from God too. And so I think are 4 reasons the Israelites turn away from God and why I think we turn away from God today. Firstly, we want control more than we want God. Now, I have this annoying habit, I'm sure Eloise will tell you about it later, of wanting to be in control in lots of situations. If I'm going on a walk with friends, I want to hold a map, I want to know where I am. I don't like not knowing where I am. And even if I'm going on a walk with a friend and they know where they're going, I'll still be on my phone looking for a map. I'll still want to know where I am. And there's been at least a few times where I've annoyed friends by asking too many questions about the route, because I don't have any phone signal, and not trusting in them. And it's a great example of the fact that I want control more than I want to trust in that person. And it's the issue that the Israelites have, and many of us have today with God too. We'd rather have control than have to fully trust in God, to rely on him to know the way when we could just have our own map, you know? Come on, God, give us a map. Judges 21:25 says this: in those days there was no king in Israel. And this isn't just like a cultural description, it's actually a diagnosis of the human heart. The Israelites didn't want a king, not even God. They wanted self-rule. They wanted to call the shots. And if we're honest, so do we. Israel disobeyed God's command to drive out the Canaanites because they thought they knew better. They said, you know what, with moral decisions, we just chose what seemed right in our eyes. They weren't bothering us at this point. And we do the same. We resist the Bible's authority when it comes to our lives, our actions, our sexuality, our money habits, our ambitions. We say we want God's will, but often we say, God, will you bless my will? There's a famous theologian who talks about Adam, and he says this: the sin of Adam was not eating a piece of fruit. It was a revolt, an attempt to dethrone God and seat himself in his place. Adam wanted to know. He wanted control. He wanted that throne, all of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's what the Israelites were doing. And it's still what we do today. Okay, 2, we prefer convenience over obedience. When Israel entered the promised land, they were commanded to remove the Canaanites, but they didn't. Why? Because it was hard, you know? There's a lot of them. It's take a long time. It's going to ruin our economy. It's going to make us uncomfortable. We have to go to lots of fights and wars. It was just simply easier not to bother. And so they didn't. They settled. They thought, we can live alongside them. We can worship God and ignore their culture. Or we could just keep those bits that don't really conflict with God. Or, well, God doesn't say anything about that thing, so maybe we can do that too. And before you know it, they are just Canaanites. And we do the same. You know, we scroll instead of pray because it's easier. We stay silent about Jesus because it's safer. We settle and compromise because it's comfier than pushing ourselves. Now, convenience and comfort aren't neutral. Like, they can numb us to our need for God. God doesn't call us to an easy, comfortable life. He calls us to carry our cross daily and to follow him. In other words, we're to die to ourselves, to what we want, and to embrace a sacrifice, living sacrificially with an eternal perspective, only looking at what will last for eternity rather than what we can get ourselves now. And so, firstly, we want control more than we want God. Secondly, we prefer convenience over obedience. And third, we forget what God has done. Judges 2 again said, another generation grew up who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. A whole generation had no memory of the Exodus. They forgot about the manna in the desert. They forgot about the miraculous Red Sea crossing. And as memory fades, so does faith. God gave Israel feasts, altars, and stories to remember, but they forgot. And so do we. I am super guilty of this, like forgetting. We forget the prayer that God answered, the strength he gave in our grief, the grace he pours out when we're weak. And instead of remembering God's faithfulness, we just like rehearse and repeat our anxieties and our ambitions and our cravings. We're like a baby that gets hungry and forgets that every meal so far has come from a very loving mother and instead cries out, what am I going to do? I'm going to starve. Because it hasn't earned its meal, it hasn't cooked its meal. It can do nothing about that. But because their mother loves them so much, the mother provides for the baby. Their life is a testament to the parents' love. If they just could remember yesterday's meal and the day before and the day before, they'd remember, oh, mum always feeds me, it's fine. And if we were like that with God, we would just remember, oh yeah, God, our life is a testament to God showing up, to helping us out, to feeding us, to answering our prayers, to being with us even in the darkest situations. So let's not forget what God has done for us. Let's put effort into remembering. And my fourth one is we're drawn to idols and quick satisfaction, quick wins. The gods of Canaan, like there's a couple mentioned, Baal and the Asheroth, were parts of the culture, and they were visible everywhere. Their shrines were flashy and their worship was sensual and thrilling. But Yahweh, our God, required holiness, obedience, and faith. Now, today's idols aren't statues that flash on a street corner, but they promise the same things. They promise control through productivity, through doing stuff, through security, through getting lots of money and being safe, comfortable. They promise validation through social media and what people say of us. It promises escape into entertainment or substance abuse. Idols offer short-term pleasure. You always have to go back. You always have to go back and get more. Only God offers lasting peace. Right, as I'm coming in to end, like the cycle of the book of Judges is crying out for an ending. It's crying out for a better judge, the judge that will come along the end and save it. Like Gideon failed, Samson failed, Jephthah failed. Even the best of them could win like battles but not win hearts. They couldn't stop people from sinning. And the book of Judges leaves us longing for a judge who doesn't fall into pride or compromise or idolatry. And at the very end of Judges, it says, the literal last verse says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. At this point, Israel's never had a king. Of course there was no king in Israel. But they want one. They want a true king. One appointed by God who can lead them wisely. And if you read on, you get Ruth, which is set in the time of Judges. Then you get 1 Samuel. In the book of 1 Samuel, they get a king. They get King Saul. And he's better. He's better than the judges before him, but he still fails eventually. Then comes King David. He's better than King Saul, but he still fails eventually. Jesus is the one true king. The end of that line, the judge who comes and doesn't fail. He's the deliverer who didn't just win a military battle, he conquered sin, death, and hell. He is the king who didn't seize power for himself, but laid down his life for his people. The cross is where the cycle ends. The cross is the end of this cycle of rebellion. Jesus took our rebellion, our forgetfulness, our idolatry, and he bore the judgment that we deserve. And in rising from the dead, he offers not just deliverance, but transformation. He doesn't just fix the situation by winning a battle. He offers to change our hearts. At the cross, we are forgiven. We die with Jesus to the powers of the world and we join him. We are united with him. At the cross, God's judgment didn't fall on the people, on us. It fell on Jesus. At the cross, justice and mercy met perfectly in one sacrifice. At the cross, a new story starts. No more spirals, no more stuck in a loop. There's just grace. And so where is Jesus in the book of Judges? Well, he's the fulfillment of everything the judges are pointing to. And he's also everything that they could never be. Now, Judges is a tough book. It's full of human failure, but it's honest and it's hopeful. It shows us what happens. It reminds us what happens when we are the rulers, when we rule ourselves. How easily we forget and compromise and turn away. But it also points forward to the cross, to Jesus, the one who never forgets, never compromised, and never turned away. And so today, let's not be putting our trust in flawed leaders. Let's not follow what's right in our own eyes. Let's follow Jesus, like the one who gave his life to deliver us and who alone will never fail. As I finish, I think there are just a couple of things that, as I've been here this morning, I feel like God's put on my heart for things that maybe ways you can take this home and apply this. Firstly, I think we should get better at remembering what God has done for us. Like I don't know how you do this or if you do this, but it's not just okay to be like, I'll just wait and then hopefully I'll remember. Because I do that and it's rubbish. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember what God's done. And then I go back and I find that diary I wrote a few years ago where I wrote down the dream I had from God, this vision I had. And I'm like, oh, that was pretty cool. Can't believe that happened, but it did. I look back in another one and I see about that prayer and that word someone gave me. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool too. Maybe God's got a plan or something here. And so it's not okay just to forget. We need to remember. We need to be actively remembering. You need to write stuff down. Find people to tell it with you who will remind you of it when you're having a bad day. Don't forget. The second thing is, I just feel like maybe there's a word here for people who aren't in a good place. They're in that suffering, in that cycle, and they're wanting that hope, and there don't seem to be any hope for them. I just feel like God is saying, like, yeah, if we look for the judge that's going to be here now, he's going to fail. Even if it's Andy, and he's great. He's going to fail. I'm going to fail. We're all going to fail. But if we can trust in Jesus, if we can go to Jesus and offer him what we have, he won't leave us standing there. He won't leave us there in our pain, in our hurting. I'm going to pray. Yeah, Jesus, I just thank you so much that you love us. That when we get stuck in cycles of suffering and pain, when things aren't going our way, you long to break us out of it. You long to write a better story with us. I just pray, would you do that this morning? Would you help us remember what you've already done? Would you help us to seek help where we need it from you? Amen.